Hello, everyone. Welcome to CYSO's Getting into College 101 Masterclass. I'm Susie Lape, CYSO's Executive Director. Thank you to everyone who's joining us on Facebook. We normally host this Getting into College seminar live in our spaces at the Fine Arts Building, and this year we'll be coming to you from all of our offices and living rooms to talk about getting into college, things that you need to know about admissions, audition process, scholarships, financial assistance, all that specialty information for music students and for students who are seeking to study music and other disciplines while at university. So lots of good information coming your way from four really brilliant panelists. I wanted to just begin by saying that we, CYSO, we don't endorse any particular college or university. What we are hoping to do is make sure that all of our students are equipped to make the best decision for them, to choose the college that works best for what they're seeking to learn and explore, and that has the conditions for them to flourish while they're at university. So this is meant to be informational to help answer your questions. We have a way for you to submit questions through the chat in the Facebook event. So you can submit your questions to us throughout our remarks, and we'll try to get to everything. There will also be a way for you to follow up with our panelists after the Facebook Live tonight. So if something is asked or you don't think of your question till later, we should be able to answer it for you. We also wanted to thank all of our four panelists for being here tonight. We normally gather together in a room and we have to have people come to Chicago. And this year we are fortunate to get to have panelists from the country who are able to join us virtually. So Steve, Emma, Trevor, and Brenda, we're so delighted that you're here. I will give a quick introduction to each of our panelists so everyone knows who's coming your way, and then they will introduce themselves to you. So we'll begin with Brenda Brenner, who is the Eugene O'Brien Bicentennial Executive Associate Dean at IU Jacobs School of Music. She's also an Associate Professor of Music Education and a violin professor there as well. So Brenda, would you like to say hello to everyone?
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to spend some time with you this evening to talk about the college process. It's one of my favorite subjects, and I love helping students through that transition from high school into college and beyond. So I'm excited to hear your questions and to share my perspective.
Great, thanks, Brenda. We're so glad you're here. Next, we have Trevor Jones, who is a bassist, an educator, a founder of the Scholarship Roadmap, which you'll hear more about. So Trevor, welcome. Do you want to say hello?
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to answer any questions you have about the college music school preparation process. I was actually a professor at Illinois Wesleyan University School of Music for 8 years, so I know a little bit about what it's like on that side, and I have had many high school students over the years, and I love helping them prepare for the next steps in their musical journey.
Great. Thank you, Trevor. Thanks for joining us. Next, we have Emma Redding, who is Assistant Director of Admissions at Lawrence Conservatory of Music. Welcome, Emma. Would you like to say hello?
Yeah, hi folks. I'm excited to answer some of your questions and connect with you all tonight. I think this is such an exciting time in your careers as musicians, kind of finding what your next step is. And I love, hearing students' stories and helping them along that path. And I hope that we'll be able to help provide some structure as you're kind of going through that college search process.
Fabulous. Thanks, Emma. And finally, we have Stephen Sano, who is professor of the Department of Music. He's Harold C. Schmidt Director of Choral Studies and the Ratchford and Carlotta A. Harris University Fellow in Undergraduate Education at Stanford University. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks to all the organizers, and California greetings to all the students out there in Facebook land. It's really a pleasure to be here. I love the admissions process, like a lot of my colleagues here on the session. I think it is an exciting time, and I look forward to hearing questions and sharing thoughts about college admissions process. I just went through this as a parent. My daughter's a sophomore in college, so all those experiences are still fresh in my brain. So it's great to be here.
Fabulous. Thanks, Steve. All right, well, without further ado, we will get into our content for the evening. And we're going to start with a question about what are the major differences between a university school of music and a conservatory of music, and kind of what's that difference between the balance of academics, between musical training and academic training, and how do you know what school format is the best fit for you? So shall we start with Steve to speak about how that how to think about that question as it relates to Stanford University?
Sure. So at Stanford, we're a small, relatively small music department within the context of a large research institution. So we're not a conservatory or school of music, so very different than the other institutions represented here. We have maybe about 40 or 50 undergraduate music majors, but we have about 1,300 probably students participating in things in our department. So I guess playing in orchestras or singing in choirs or taking a composition seminar or whatever. I guess one thing to think about is, and it's really the big question I think in my mind in your college exploration, is thinking about fit. At Stanford, for example, one's kind of academic profile and kind of intellectual vitality, that's going to be the number one thing that the Office of Undergraduate Admissions is looking for. We have brilliant musicians, and that can be a part of your, that can be a component in what you send to the university in your application materials. But it's interesting, you could be the next Heifetz, and if you can't survive Math 51 easily, it's not going to be a good fit, right? So it really is about fit and finding the place that's right in terms of providing opportunities for your passion and what's a good academic fit. It can be weather. I mean, California is California, and that could be a good or a bad thing. It just, if you like seasons, we don't have like fall here. Like the colors don't change. Maybe that's important. So it can be so many different things. But I think the big question as far as music goes is program, resources, and opportunity. So, and if you, as you start exploring those kind of things, what you're able to do. And the other thing I think that's super important and that I get asked all the time is, what can I do as a student? And at Stanford, for example, everything we offer is open to everybody, is open to every single student, every ensemble, every class, every seminar, every performing group. They're all open to every student in the university. So that kind of changes. That's one thing that helps define kind of the environment.
Great, thanks, Steve. That's super helpful and will be very different from a university like IU. So, and I use music and music education department. So Brenda, do you want to speak a little bit about what that's like?
Sure. IU is sort of the quintessential Midwestern large public campus. If you've been down here, it's gorgeous. We do have fall and spring, but we also have winter and we have very hot summers. If you like basketball, this is a great place to be. Football, not so much. But we are really kind of what I would consider a conservatory setting within a university. So the Jacobs School students all come in as undergraduates and have general education requirements that they have to meet in order to graduate. So those requirements are taught by members of the faculty outside of Jacobs. So you would take your English classes from professors of English. And that's somewhat different than you would find at a more conservatory environment where I went to Eastman, and at Eastman they had their own dedicated faculty to teach the outside of music requirements. So at IU's campus, you have opportunity to explore lots of subjects similar to Stanford outside of music as well. We have a degree called the Bachelor of Science with an outside field, where you can actually study your instrument but get almost like a major in something else as well. So we have a lot of students who are interested in doing those sorts of things. They have a terrific honors program here with some really high-level classes. So there is lots of opportunity within this large campus. Unlike Stanford, though, is a very, very large music school. We have 1,600 students, graduate and undergraduate here. So it's almost like a city in itself, or a small campus within itself, which has some great things, lots and lots of opportunities to see world-class performance and to participate in many, many different things musically. You get a very rich experience at a school that's as large as this. But there are also things you have to take into account. If you're a person who is more comfortable in a smaller learning environment, then you need to make sure that within the structure of the Jacobs School, you would have that sort of smaller learning community. And I think that's really important to consider as you are searching for your school, is what is the right fit? Would I feel comfortable there? And I think as we get through the next period of time, we'll explore some questions that maybe you would want to ask as you start to go through this process of looking at the schools.
Awesome. Thank you, Brenda. So well said. And that challenge of finding your small group, your niche in a larger environment, I think that's something that lots of kids think about. Certainly, at Stanford and at IU Jacobs, that would be a similar path in some ways and in other ways quite different. So good to hear both perspectives. Emma, would you speak a little bit about Lawrence University and how a student experience might be similar or different?
Yeah, so Lawrence is a liberal arts university and a music conservatory. We're kind of two degree granting bodies in one. You can think of it that way. And that's one way that we may be different from a conservatory that's like a standalone kind of institution. So unlike somewhere like Brenda was saying, like Eastman, your classes in more general studies like your humanities and your sciences and such will also be taught by professors in a liberal arts university. And that liberal arts influence is definitely felt in the music side of things, and how we approach musicology and music theory in our classes, and how we approach performance practice and things like that, and like thinking outside the box a lot. At Lawrence, we kind of have different levels in terms of how focused within the conservatory you want your education to be. So if you wanted to do kind of a full Bachelor of Music, which would be a lot more similar to like a degree at like a standalone conservatory or in a music school where you're focusing on music education or performance or composition, about 2/3 of your classes are going to be in the conservatory, with the rest in the college being more of those general education requirements. But we also have a double degree program where you actually do a full Bachelor of Arts in the college and a full Bachelor of Music in the conservatory. I'm a Lawrence alum, and that's what I did when I was a student there. And then we have a Bachelor of Arts in Music, which is something you might find at a school that is just a liberal arts university with a music department, where it's more of a generalist music degree where you're studying and you have maybe 1.5 hour recital, but you're a little bit more focused on the academics side of things, exploring the liberal arts and all of that. And coming from talking about IU, where your music department's actually a little bit bigger than our school, that's the size is such an important thing. And you really have to, think about what size is right for you. Lawrence is about 1,500 students with about 350 to 400 students in music as a major. Although, like Stanford, we have a lot of students participating in the conservatory, probably about double, another 400 or so students on top of those ones that are just doing music as a major. And just thinking about what size is the best fit for you. And, I always compare myself. I did great at a small school like Lawrence. My brother went to Colorado State Boulder, which is, again, a flagship large public state school. And he did really well there. And I preferred the smaller environment. He prefers a larger environment. So that's something that's, really important to kind of think about. And then thinking about what distribution of classes you want. You can focus on music while really honing in on performance or music education, but you can also explore music while exploring other things and thinking about what other areas you want to explore, how the colleges you're looking at does those programs, and what the balance they allow between music and that other subject, if that's something you're interested in.
Wonderful, thank you. That challenge of assessing fit and the balance and flexibility of pursuing music while you pursue other disciplines is really interesting and wonderful to hear that that's possible in many different places, just take slightly different forms. So we'll move on to our next question, which is, how important is it for students to research the schools that they apply to? Is it important for students to take a lesson or have an interview with the instructor at the university or conservatory they're interested in before they apply? And then I'd like for Trevor to speak about that first, and also think about, how do you know if you are going to try to build a relationship with a faculty member? How do you know which faculty member to reach out to? So Trevor, would you like to begin?
Sure. So to answer this question in short, yes, it is critical to research every institution, every teacher, every curriculum, every aspect of the school if you are serious about going there. And beyond figuring out more about all of those things for yourself, this level of research will also indicate to the school your level of seriousness about the school. And it's amazing. I've been doing an interview series the last few weeks, and I've been speaking to a lot of studio faculty, and a couple of them said, people have actually showed up and auditioned for me, and they didn't even know the name of the school. So I interviewed the viola professor from West Virginia University School of Music, and she said they showed up and called it the University of West Virginia. This is a big problem. So that's obviously an extreme version of not doing research. But we definitely want to research the schools for sure. We want to research the teachers. And as far as getting, in touch with the teacher, this is one of the things I help my clients do, is figure out what is the best strategy. So depending on the teacher, the first step may be contacting music admissions. And I think it's also good to understand that music admissions, they want to hear from you. They want to hear from you. They want to hear about you. They want to hear what your story is. And they really want to hear from the student, because it's the student who's going to be attending that school, not the parent. But when I was teaching at Illinois Wesleyan, I was very happy to hear from students directly. I didn't care if they went through the head of admissions. At a place, and Brenda, maybe you could speak to this, at a place like Jacobs that is enormous, there's more of maybe a couple people you go through before you go to the studio teacher. But it kind of depends on that. And going back to this question of research, I always tell my students and clients, there is so much information available right now online. I am a partner on a podcast, and all we do are interviews of double bassists across the world. And many of them happen to be faculty members. And so I always say, if you're somebody who's looking to study double bass, we've done like 750 interviews. I bet you can find them on there. And you can really get a sense then, for a studio teacher, for instance, what they're all about. And if you see that they have a particular style of music or a composer that they really love, you have some great information to start your relationship then with that student by engaging them on a topic that they are already really interested in. And then again, that goes back to showing them that you did the research. And that's a great way to start out.
Thanks, Trevor. That's awesome. Well, that's a good segue to Brenda. How is that different, or what would you recommend for IU Jacobs?
I think Trevor stole all of my good comments. So I think we're on the same page there. I would say that is really, really important to do your research. And that can take many forms. And you students today are in a really unique position because everything we're doing is virtual. So it's so easy to reach out after you've done your research to various faculty members, shoot them an email, and respectfully ask if there's a chance for you to have a conversation with them, to ask any questions that you might have. And I think that's really important for me, is those students who've done their homework in advance. They know what kind of school IU is. They come prepared with some questions to ask me about the curriculum or the program. and that they're speaking for themselves. It does bother me quite a bit when parents do all of the speaking for their students. I will say over the now this is my 28th year teaching here. I have worked with many parents, and I'm happy to talk to the parents. I want to talk to the parents as well, but I really want the student to take the lead so that I get a sense of who this person is and whether this is a good match. I have well, you can imagine at a school like IU, I get many students requesting sample lessons. And if I taught all sample lessons to everyone who contacted me, I would never get anything done. So one of the things that I do, and one of the things that I think is really important for music students to do, is to ask to observe lessons or a studio class from that teacher, so you can get an idea of what is the level of the students of that teacher. What kind of people are they that you would be colleagues with, peers with? Are these your peeps? Are these people that you like and that you would feel welcomed by and excited to be in their studio? Or do you not get that feeling? And I think that's really important to investigate as you go through this process. I think any teacher should be welcoming and answer your questions, spend some time with you. If they don't have time to do a full sample lesson, then at least hear you play and give you a little bit of feedback. I think that's really important. And I know that I want to know who I'm speaking to musically as well. So I can say you would be a great fit here, or maybe this is not such a great fit for you, depending upon who the student is. So I think those are some things that are really important, but the research is really imperative.
Great advice, Brenda. Thank you. Steve, how is this different or similar at Stanford?
No, I think I would concur with what my colleagues have said so far. I think building relationships, I think, is one of the most important things in the college experience, period. So and faculty, and I bet you my colleagues here would agree, faculty love it when students take the initiative, right? Excuse me, and approach them and ask questions and explore what opportunities are available. So even in the application/admissions process, yeah, I would absolutely encourage folks to reach out to faculty members who are engaged in areas in which you're interested. Before we were just having a little meeting before this session started, just amongst us to get logistics right, and I was saying how I get emails just randomly from high school juniors and seniors all the time, and I'm happy to try to answer their questions. If I don't know the answers, send them to someone on campus who does know how to answer their questions. And those students who take that initiative, and then if they're admitted to Stanford and they choose to matriculate at Stanford, those students who come and bang on your door during office hours, I mean, that's one of the really, and now we do it all digitally, but we have digital office hours. That's how you build those relationships that are mentoring and will aid you in your career as a musician as you go forward through your university experience and beyond. So absolutely, I think it's important to do that research and to reach out. And by and large, I don't know, music faculty folks are nice. They like talking to students. So I certainly do. So I would say absolutely encourage prospective applicants to do that.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Emma, any final thoughts about reaching out or doing research at Lawrence?
One thing to keep in mind with sample lessons, if you're able to do them, check if they are free and provided by the school, or if you need to pay. That's just kind of like a good logistics thing to keep in mind. At Lawrence, all of our sample lessons are free, and because we're smaller, we are sometimes more able to accommodate those, but not always. Usually don't start asking until you're at least like in the tail end of your junior year. Usually it's better to have more of a conversation earlier than that, as the faculty are going to be working with seniors every year, and kind of maybe focusing their availability with those folks. And the other two quick points, one is that the research also helps us help you better. I see that as an admissions counselor every day. I'm just talking to students about how Lawrence could be a good fit for them. And, if a student has a clear idea of, like, Lawrence doesn't have a musical theater program, and if they know they want to do that and they didn't do their research and didn't realize that we didn't have that program, then it's not as productive as a conversation for them as it would be if, we have a great opera program and a student that did that research and figured that out. And then it's like, oh, I heard you guys did Marriage of Figaro last year. And, this is your director of opera. And, what is it like for students to work with them? That helps me help you a lot more. And then the last thing I'll say, and I know Brenda's going to touch on this too a little bit, is that students are often a really great resource for you as well. At Lawrence, we do a lot of kind of student panels and student one-on-one chats. Often the faculty will connect students in their studio to prospective students who maybe have similar interests, come from a similar part of the country, have some commonality, or it's a current student that's really good at, like, just kind of laying out the conservatory and talking about things. I remember having a conversation with a flutist at Lawrence when I was looking at schools, and it was one of my, like, deciding factors to come there, because they can kind of give you the real deal about the faculty and have that more informal conversation about the vibe in the studio and those sorts of things. So I'll let Brenda talk about that a little bit more, but look for ways to connect with those students, either by asking the faculty or seeing what the admissions office has set up already.
Yeah, go ahead. Would you like to add to that, Brenda?
Well, I think Emma said it. Basically, in my studio, I have a series of students who they serve as my ambassadors, and I encourage students to come visit. And now this is obviously not going to happen right now, but come to visit the campus, spend a full day there. They hang with my students, they go to their classes. They eat lunch with them, and they get a little dorm tour to see how, what is it like to be there. I think that you guys can do a lot of that right now. I know that Zooming into various classes with people is totally allowed and encouraged. Having conversations with people who are current students via Zoom is great. And certainly, I think I would encourage all of you to ask, are there students that I can talk to or shadow for a day? Because that's going to give you the real lowdown on what it's like to be a student at that school.
Wonderful. Thanks, Brenda. And I also wanted to put a quick plug in for CYSO students watching that we definitely have recent CYSO alumni at Lawrence, at Stanford, and at IU Jacobs, and pretty much I would gamble anywhere else you might be looking. So if you reach out to Karen at the CYSO staff and ask for a recent CYSO grad who's at the school that you're shopping, we can probably connect you. And our alumni are always really gracious and happy to do that kind of mentoring. And this year it'll be Zoom conversations to get you oriented. So next we're going to talk about auditions, which is always a hot topic. Lots of questions there. I guess before we kick off into the nitty gritty of how auditions for various music schools function and what admissions faculty are looking at, are there any major updates to that process due to COVID-19? I know all the three of you teaching at university, and Trevor, you too, are all navigating big COVID-19 adjustments to your everyday right now, whether that's social distancing or doing more things virtually or whatever. But do you know, are you able to share with our students major updates to the admissions cycle or admissions process relating to COVID-19? Is there stuff they should know? And I'll just let whoever of you would like to speak hop in.
I can kick this off. I would have been in Chicago listening to live auditions at the end of October had this been a non-COVID year, and I'm very sorry we're not able to do that. So for us, all auditions are online. We're not doing any live auditions, not even the ones at Stanford. So everything is online, and all the specifics are available online. And if you want to delve into that more, you can get in touch with me through the CYSO office afterwards. But that's the big change for us, is because of COVID, is there are no live auditions.
And any other updates folks want to share?
We're also online. I think pretty much. I don't know. Maybe Emma, you're doing something face to face, but it's very uncertain out there, and I think we have decided to do everything by either pre-recorded or Zoom auditions.
Same at Lawrence. We're doing all pre-recorded auditions this year, with follow-up from the faculty if they want to do more of a live lesson or something afterwards. So playing it safe, yeah.
Well, good to know. And at very least, I suppose people will save a little money on traveling across the country to visit schools this year. We'll be doing it all on Zoom. So maybe that's a little silver lining. So next we're going to talk about the admissions process and auditions. So to begin, we'd like each of you to share your perspective on the audition process at your institution, and what students should keep in mind for that. And we have some little sub questions for you to keep in mind that our panelists have listed. So Emma, would you like to go first to share about the audition process at Lawrence?
Sure. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing this year, and also for any younger students on the call, what, fingers crossed, it'll look like, in not maybe next year, maybe the year after that. So like I said, we're doing all recorded auditions, and that's a good thing to keep in mind this year. Like, are your schools going to be doing pre-recorded auditions, or are they going to be doing live auditions on Zoom? And just figuring out what that looks like, and making sure that you're ready and prepared for whichever format that's going to be. And at Lawrence, a big part of our audition day experience is a big event. Normally we'd have like a big event with panels, and the dean and his dog comes, and you get to meet current students and all of that. It's kind of festive, and we've moved that online this year. But any of the schools that you're auditioning to, if they have the option to, have more of those extra activities, they're often music student focused, and they are a really good way to kind of learn some extra things. So we have panels on career services for musicians, and a student panel with our dean that students and parents can ask questions of. And it's really helpful to go to these. These are a great event, I think, for parents to come to as well, and at Lawrence and other schools. Especially if you, in the future, were to do live auditions, you can kind of tag team, and while you're auditioning, your parents can go to a presentation or something like that. And then the last kind of main note I'll make, that for when hopefully live auditions are reality again sometime in the future, is that you may have kind of a panel format for your audition, or more of a lesson format. So a panel is where you've got all of the woodwind department. Like if I was auditioning on flute, I'd be playing for, all of the woodwind faculty. It's a little more formal usually. It's, a little bit shorter, and maybe more like a 10, 15, 20 minutes in length. And you might be interrupted. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but, kind of some questions from the faculty. And that's kind of what that format looks like. And then there's also lesson format auditions, where you basically have a lesson with the faculty for your audition. It's more like a 30 to 60 minutes in length, and you're working kind of one-on-one with them. And they're seeing a little bit more about, how do you react when I give you a certain feedback on something, and how do you adapt to that? So that's the format Lawrence uses for most of our auditions, with the exception of voice and violin, just with the number of applicants that we have in those areas. But another good thing to keep in mind kind of going forward, after this year and the more virtual audition experience that schools are having.
Wonderful. Thanks, Emma. And speaking of violin, Brenda, would you like to share how auditions work at IU Jacobs?
Sure. In a traditional year, and I believe we will continue this practice, we do have pre-screening for specific instruments. So violin is one of them, where you have to turn in a pre-screening tape on December 1st to see if you make it to the next round, because otherwise we would be there for days and days listening to violinists who wish to audition. So check your instrument and its requirements very carefully online. So there's a list of repertoire requirements, and it does tell online whether there's a pre-screening requirement. So that is coming up fairly soon on December 1st for those instruments. My advice for auditioning is to choose your repertoire carefully. I am not a big fan of choosing repertoire that is extremely difficult, thinking that if you can get through that, they'll somehow think that's a major feat. So I know that my colleagues and I would rather hear someone play something really beautifully that is maybe a less difficult piece than to hear someone really struggling with a very difficult piece. So choose something that you love, that you play well, and be prepared well in advance. So this is not something where you want to peak on this piece just the weekend before your audition, but it should be something that you have a lot of practice performing, and you feel confident and you feel that you can put your best product out there. This year with the pre-recorded and Zoom auditions, I would recommend that you get some help from someone like Trevor, who can maybe give you some advice about best practices for recording. I think that's very important, that you have a decent quality recording. It does not have to be professional, but you do want something that gives a good representation of your tone and the beauty with which you play. And I think there is an art to doing Zoom as well. So I teach a lot of Zoom lessons, and many of mine I have to, say to the kid, well, you need to turn the other direction, or please get out of the window because I can't see you at all. It just looks like a big black blob. So really important that you set it up so that you are able to be assessed in the most positive light.
That's great. Thank you. And good transition to Trevor, because you coach lots of students who are navigating the college admissions or the audition process at lots of different schools. So what advice do you have?
Yeah, well, this is, of course, assuming that you're doing an online audition. If you have the chance to do an in-person audition in the future, I highly recommend that you visit the schools in person for a lot of the reasons that we've already mentioned. But assuming that you're going to be auditioning, this is your senior year, and you're auditioning to attend college next fall. First thing, dress well. And when I say dress well, what I mean by that is that you should wear something that accentuates the music. And that, for me, and maybe it's just because I spend so much time in a pit orchestra and musical theater, but that for me means wearing black. And the reason I at least start with black, I'm not saying you have to wear black, is that it actually can accentuate, if you're a string player, your hands, if you're a woodwind player, your hands. If you're a vocalist, wearing all black takes all the focus up to your head. And so this is just something you want to be mindful of. I don't think this is going to make or break an audition, but it's just something to consider. And then as far as the quality of the music goes, it makes sense to invest in some decent recording equipment. And I would never just buy something without doing any research. Start with what you have. If you have an iPhone, start with your iPhone. They actually sound pretty great, but you may just have to mess around a little bit with what room you record in. And so I would not record in some enormous church with, tons of reverb and everything. Record in a room that gives the person who's going to listen to this an authentic version of you, warts and all. But if you do want to look for a microphone, Shure MV88, if you're looking for an exact model, is a pretty good one. Zoom H6 is also cool. But do your research. There's no shortage of testimonials and reviews on YouTube for all of this. And yeah, like Brenda was saying, maybe don't wait until the last minute, like the night before you're going to record, to figure out that you actually don't have a great space with great lighting. Like I have this amazing lighting right now with this huge glare off the top of my head. I would not record an audition in this space. But during the day, I have all the light coming through the window, and then that can really show what I'm doing on my instrument and who I am as a performer. So that's something to keep in mind, but plan ahead so you're not buying gear off of Amazon, two nights before. And, You know, the other thing, and this is really important, and I think some people don't do this on purpose, but they can process the audio after they record it. So they could add reverb to it. Someone was really trying to get something over on someone, they could potentially tune it, which is probably, I couldn't think of many worse things to do. If you do that and the school figures it out, and they will figure it out, because everyone who's listening to auditions is a professional, and they can hear all of these minute details. Do not do any processing on the recording afterwards in a DAW, a digital audio workstation. No reverb, pitch correction, anything like that. Just let it be the natural sound that comes through the room. And then, as far as preparation, make some videos before the one that you actually submit. Record the audition 6 weeks in advance, 2 months in advance. Send it around to your peers. Send it around to anybody at CYSO, and just like get some feedback. A lot of times, some of the stuff that will make components that will make your video better are really obvious, and you may just not have been thinking of them because you were thinking about playing from a bass player rehearsal number 9 in Heldenleben, for instance. But if you get that those videos to someone else, sometimes they can get some of the obvious mistakes. So that's an abbreviated list.
That's great, Trevor. Thank you.
Sure.
And Steve, would you like to chime in here about how auditions work at Stanford?
Sure. So some really great comments and suggestions from everybody. One thing about applying at Stanford with an audition, so it's the context. So at Stanford, you actually apply to the university. You don't apply to the Department of Music. It's just your audition would be one component in a much larger application. So obviously your essays and your teacher and counselor recs and your board scores and everything. Although this year SATs are not required, or standardized testing is not required. If you're unable to take them, it's not going to hurt your application just because of the situation we're in with COVID. But it's one component out of a much larger package, and actually the audition goes to the Office of Undergraduate Admissions. It doesn't go directly to our to the music department. They will in turn send the auditions to us, and then we farm them out to the faculty member in those different areas. So violin audition goes to violin faculty, piano audition goes to piano faculty, etc. It's a 10 minutes, about 10 minutes. We're very non-prescriptive. And like Brenda was saying, something that you really enjoy playing and believe shows your abilities well is the key. And we look for maybe a couple different contrasting pieces. So if you're a violinist, you could be doing solo Bach and then movement from Romantic Concerto or something like that. That would be great. We do only accept auditions in one area. So if you're a violinist and you're Carnatic Indian singer, you're going to have to pick one of them for which one to submit. Unfortunately, we can't take more than one. We do ask for one take, nothing edited. Like Trevor was saying, all that post-production editing stuff, not acceptable. Not acceptable. So one take, but it does not have to be, like he was saying, fancy equipment. It is pretty amazing what you can do with an iPhone these days, and even more so, just aside of setting the technical thing aside, it's an access and equity thing. I mean, right? It's like people have smartphones and they can make recordings on them. It should not be going out and renting studio time or buying equipment. We really want it to be a much more level playing field for folks. The other thing is that a couple of these other bullet points that Susie had provided us. So grades and test scores and things like that. Grades, like I said, because this is just one component, and I had mentioned earlier, your academics at Stanford are actually going to be the gating factor for everything. So your boards, your high school transcript will be really important, and those letters of rec, and your essays. I got to tell you, your essays are really important, because that is the way that the admissions officers who make the final decision get to know you. So really put thought into your essays. Don't try to write 2 essays and make them shoehorn them in to fit all the different supplemental essay requirements for different institutions. Really give thought into that. One other point that was on this list here was extracurriculars and community service. I think one way to think about this is what you are passionate about, what really makes life exciting and happy for you. I had a prospective applicant once asked, come to my office and visit. They were still in high school. Well, do I have enough extracurriculars or do I have enough community service? It's like, man, that's the wrong question, right? Is it like, do you enjoy working at the animal shelter because you have a passion for your pets? Then that's what's important, right? It's not the number of hours. So be thinking about those kinds of things, I think. One other thing, the Stanford specific, what happens is when you submit the audition, it will be evaluated by the appropriate member from the faculty member from the Department of Music. And then it can't hurt. It can only help. So if it's a weak evaluation, the admissions officers won't even look at it. If it's a strong evaluation, then they will consider that along with everything else. So that's just a little more context.
That's great to know. And on that same vein of access and equity, Steve, in our COVID silver linings bucket, I guess we have that this year, the tremendous expense and time and burden of traveling to visit places in person for a trial lesson and then for an audition. In a sense, this year is going to be a lot more equitable because we can do all of that virtually, but there's still a lot that you have on your plate and that you need to prepare. We normally caution kids about that sort of frenetic pace of running around all the country and getting sick before your auditions and biting off more than you can chew. And this year you still have a lot on your plate and there's still a lot going on. It's just a little different. So any advice from our panelists about how to kind of manage that timeline and burnout in the ramp up to college auditions? And anyone with thoughts on that can chime in.
Sure. I have students that have taken different strategies. One of them, say you have 7 auditions that you're taking. Sometimes taking the first audition and then giving yourself a little bit of room to breathe after that is nice because you aren't totally sure how you're going to react to a Zoom audition. And when I say a break, I don't mean 2 months, but maybe give yourself a week as opposed to having an audition on Monday, then Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, or whatever the days are. So giving yourself a little bit time to react, reflect, go through all the emotions that come with auditioning. And then also there's this concept of tapering that I think is worth considering as well into auditions. I think a lot of times we can practice and get even more frenetic right before the first audition because we're really worried. We want to think that we've put everything that we possibly can into these auditions. And while it's important to do that, I rarely find that staying up until 2 a.m. the night before an audition is a good strategy. If you do not have it learned by 2 a.m. the night before, the odds of it getting better the next day are extremely low. So tapering means that actually in the days leading up, and let's say 3 or 4 days leading into the first audition, we actually kind of take a step back. And maybe, say we wake up and we just spend 20 minutes on long tones, making sure that we're touching the instrument, and we do a significant amount of mental practice, really going through orchestral excerpts, solo rep, etudes, whatever you're playing, and getting centered psychologically for these auditions. I use this technique in the professional world all the time, in particular when I'm subbing on a show in musical theater and I have an enormous amount of music going on in my head. Rarely does practicing the night before or nights before until the early hours make a difference. And really what that means overall is having a true plan going into these auditions.
Great, yeah, and planning in general, with all the application processes and audition timelines, some of this is just staying organized, having a good way of notating somewhere what's coming up, when your deadlines are, making sure to give yourself space to get really amply ready for everything. Lots of time to review essays, lots of time to record, review your recording, make sure you feel good about it. So make sure you build yourself that cushion for some review and editing. Well, that was a good dovetail, I think, into some more. We've talked about auditions. But for some other admissions process questions that, auditions are a big part of that, but there are other things that we keep in mind for admissions, grades, test scores, extracurricular activities, and community service. Steve touched on that some for Stanford, but we haven't heard. So can we hear Emma from Lawrence about that admissions process and what that's like?
Yeah, of course. I want to add one thing to what Trevor said, which I think your advice was fantastic for thinking about that and kind of structuring how you practice. One thing that I have found really important is to think that, to realize that the faculty are not looking for perfection. If you were a perfect player, they wouldn't need to teach you. They're looking for potential, and they're looking for how you will work with them. And I find as in my own musical life, like going in with that mindset can be really helpful for your auditions, because you're just going in to show them what you've accomplished so far and where you're at. If you miss a note or your intonation's not perfect, that's not going to be like the deciding factor that won't let you into their studio. And that's another reason why that process and relationship building is so important, because that's one way that they see that potential. So just wanted to throw that out there. But yeah, talking about some of the other things in the admissions process, I want to definitely echo what Steve said about the essay. So I read applications like every day. It's application season starting to ramp up, starting to get the applications in. And that essay is such an important part. It's kind of the little core of who you are that shines through regardless of your grades and your resumes and your lists of things that you've done. It's something that having a story and I think of it as a personal narrative essay, like a story about some moment in your life that may have, for musicians, it's often wonderful to talk about like some performance or a concert that was that spark that was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Or it doesn't have to be about music either. It can be just about something that was really meaningful to you. Grades, again, music schools are going to weight grades versus auditions differently depending on the program. I would say we're more similar to what Stanford does, where your academics do need to be we're an academically rigorous program, so like having academics at a similar level to your music skills. But especially with COVID, reach out to your admissions counselors and put those grades in context for them. When you're asking your high school guidance counselors to send your transcripts in, and something called a school report, which just tells us like what classes your school offers and that sort of thing. If they can provide an explanation of how grades were given during the spring this year and continuing into the fall, if it was hard for you to do online schooling, or your school district was, a little disorganized or something like that, talking with the admissions counselors and letting them know some of that context is going to be really important this year. I know when I'm reading applications, we often look for context and we also look for progress. So like if your freshman year wasn't so hot and you struggle a little bit in some subjects, that doesn't mean that you can't get into a school where academics are something that's, counts a lot in your application. If you've been able to kind of find better study habits, connect with your teachers, build up from there, that's something that's going to look good for us. And I guess the last thing I'll mention is kind of thinking about test scores. Lawrence is a test optional institution, and we have been since 2006. So a lot of schools are kind of doing what Stanford's doing and moving away, at least for this year, of counting those tests. And it's a good thing to just check with your schools and, see what their policies are about testing. At Lawrence, I encourage students to submit their tests if they think they're a good reflection of them as a student. For some students, it is a great reflection of them. Sometimes it's better than their grades. But if, testing is not your thing, if you have test anxiety or just like haven't been able to take tests because of COVID, don't worry about it. That's something it's an extra piece of information at Lawrence. So it's not always like this essential deciding factor. There's a lot more things that make you who you are than just what score you got from SAT and sitting in a room for 4 hours at some day. And yeah.
Great, thank you. Brenda, how is this, or how does this work at IU?
It's a two-tiered process to enter IU. So the first step is to apply to IU as the university. And so that's a separate application from Jacobs. So we have a direct admit to Jacobs. So once you've been accepted to IU, then you apply for Jacobs. I would say that for performance, people who are interested in performance majors, the level of playing is extremely high, and our expectations are really high. So that has a huge bearing on whether we accept you into Jacobs as a performance major. Music education has a separate interview from the performance audition. And in that interview, the music education faculty talks with you a little bit about your experience teaching thus far. So if you've done any peer teaching, or you happen to teach kids in your neighborhood, or why are you interested in teaching? So we spend some time with each candidate to see whether they have a teaching personality, and whether it's someone we feel it has great potential as a teacher. So that's a separate score from the performance auditions. So it's really, depending upon what program you're looking at, multi-level kind of application process. I don't even know whether we have an essay, which is, it's funny to hear you guys, Steve and Emma, to talk about that, because I started my career at Carleton College, where, it's a small liberal arts, very high level college. And my youngest daughter goes to Colorado College, which is also a small liberal arts school. And so in those kinds of instances, it's a very different process where you're putting your personality out there through the essay. And IU is much more just straight ahead. There are 44,000 students in the university. So I don't think they're poring over essays so much as, do you get decent grades? It's test optional this year for the first year. Do you have good letters of recommendation? Do you have a good performance score? Does Jacobs want you to be there? Those all are really, really important aspects.
Good to know. We have another question, which is, how many schools should I apply to? And I think if there was a magic number, we would tell you. I don't think there's a magic number. Do any of our panelists have a perspective on how students can kind of navigate what's right for them?
Sure. The first thing I think that's important in this whole process is getting an honest assessment of where you are as a performer. And, if you're looking to pursue a degree, a performance degree, or, I did my undergrad music education, but I was still very serious about my performance. So I wanted to get an honest assessment, not only from my current private teacher, but anyone else who was trustworthy that was in my world. And then you have to have that hard, potentially difficult conversation where you say, hey, am I cut out for this school? What do you think? And perhaps, the entire decision doesn't hinge on one person's opinion. But to what Brenda was saying earlier tonight, if you get to the point when you contact a teacher at a school and you perform for them, and they say, it doesn't seem like you'd be a great fit here, that's a pretty, I don't know how much more of a direct feedback that you could get. You should take that into account. I do use a system where I actually kind of rank schools, and the ranking is not what most people perceive, which is like what their acceptance rate is. But it's more, you try to gauge like how many spots are actually available in the studio. And say you're in a violin studio that has 20 spots and there's one open, there are going to be 125 applicants. That's going to be pretty tough no matter how great your audition is. So we don't want to select, say, 5 schools that all are going to studios like that. That would be, you'd be setting yourself up for a pretty tough spring. So you want to kind of spread the schools out over the range of acceptance rates into the studio. And sometimes it's estimating what the acceptance rate is. Sometimes you can only gather so much information. But a sweet spot for some people is 7 schools. especially now where you don't have to travel. I think that's even more possible for some people. I certainly didn't do 7 in undergrad. I think I did 3 or 4, and that worked great for me. I put everything into those schools and meeting those teachers, and that really worked well for me. But for some other people, especially instruments that just have an enormous amount of competition, you may want to spread yourself throughout the spectrum of music schools a little bit more. So I don't have a number for you that is infallible, but I'd say somewhere probably in between 4 and 7, depending on your individual circumstance.
Yeah, that sounds good and reasonable, Trevor. Steve, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, all really good points that Trevor brings up. And I think one thing is there has been in the last probably 15 years this really freneticized arms race for college admissions, and students are just applying to 20 schools. And I I think the really backing up for the 30,000-foot view, I would say, don't let it take over your life. Don't let the college admissions process take over your life, and your family's life as well. And part of that is finding what the institutions that might be a good fit. And yes, you can have your reach schools and kind of your target and your safety and all that. If you need to think of things that way, maybe that's a good way to think about kind of the whole panoply of possible institutions to which you're going to apply. But yeah, I think actually Trevor's even though he said there's not a hard number, I think what he's suggesting is really healthy. And the 18, 20, 22 schools kind of thing, I don't think there's a need for it. And I think what it says partly is that in a way you haven't done your work to really find out where the best fit might be for you.
Yeah, good to remember. You can only go to one of them, probably. So narrowing it on where you really, really want to be and where you see yourself, and then making a strong case for it sounds like a great plan. Another really important topic that is always on everybody's front on everybody's mind is how on earth do I afford college? What's the deal with that? So Trevor, I know you help orient a lot of students around financial aid, loans, what kind of different loans exist, and scholarships. So can you talk a little bit about things people should keep in mind for that?
Sure. I want to preface this by saying I am not a financial advisor. I'm not a fiduciary. I do not have special certifications in this. This is just from practical experience. One place I think that is really difficult for parents and students is figuring out well in advance in the process what school is actually even possible to afford. And we don't want to find out on all the schools, hey, we can't afford any of those schools in April. That's a problem. So one of the things that can be done is, for instance, let's say you're in a situation where you are making enough money where you're really not going to qualify for much need-based aid, if any. Then you want to focus on schools that have merit, merit awards. Now, I also want to preface this by saying in the music world, it's still all the things that we've talked about before this, I think in some ways supersede this. If you do your research, you find the school that aligns with your needs, you connect with a teacher that is really going to be great for you. I don't want to say everything's going to work out, but a lot of things can actually work themselves out. But if you really want to get mathematical about it, there's this amazing team out in California. I think they go by Double J Consultants, but they put together a spreadsheet of 600 schools that they give the average amount of merit awards to students who don't qualify for need-based aid. So you can look at it that way if you want. And I provide those spreadsheets as well. I think they're open to the public, and they're really helpful early on in the process. But a lot of it is just like actually reaching out to the school and saying, hey, here's my situation, admissions counselor or studio teacher, and then they'll probably get you to somebody else. But trying to gauge what are these awards like. And I'll give you a real world example of a bass player I was recruiting when I was teaching. He came down and played for me, and I really, really wanted him as a student. And I immediately went to the head of the music school admissions, and I said, we've got to do everything we can to get him here. He's perfect for the studio and the school. His test scores, everything, he academically would be successful. And he ended up qualifying for quite a bit of need-based aid, and then he ended up getting the biggest scholarship that was awarded at the school. I'm pretty sure that it covered 90% of his expenses when it was all said and done. And I actually just spoke to him the other night just to follow up on this to make sure I wasn't being inaccurate by saying this. But when he looked at the sticker price of the school, he thought, I have no idea if I can actually afford the school, because Wesleyan is a pretty expensive school. Sticker price. Do not be turned off by the sticker price. There are a lot of schools that have amazing endowments that can put together a financial package that can work for you. And I also, depending on the school, some of them will list scholarships out front, and they will say, here's a scholarship, and this one's worth $35,000 a year for you. That's super helpful. You can see that. Not all schools do that. There's a whole pool of money that goes on in behind closed doors, and there's a lot of actions that are taken that not everybody really knows about to try to make all of this work. And I should call my dad about this. He was the head of a music school for like 20 years. And he said, I don't even know what admissions did sometimes to make these financial packages happen. So it can be a pretty convoluted process, but starting with figuring out if you're going to qualify for any need-based aid is a great place to start. And then getting in touch with the schools is really important. But don't be turned off by the sticker price. That doesn't mean that's going to be the school where you may end up paying the most.
Yeah, great advice, Trevor. I think we CYSO administrators often nudge students to say, if you're presuming you can't afford somewhere, let's look into it a little more and see what we can do. Maybe throw your hat in the ring. Certainly before you commit to something, you want to know what you're committing to, but really, work to advocate for yourself and to shop around, and you can be surprised how far schools can extend to help you. Emma, how does need and merit-based aid work at Lawrence?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with that. Like, as working at a small liberal arts school, like, our sticker price is high, but we are, known for having pretty generous aid, especially within our price bracket. And I always tell students that, right now, and we're kind of getting to the financial aid season, but like, when you're making that list of where you want to apply to, financial aid doesn't need to be the number one concern, because you won't know yet what you're actually going to get at those schools. So find the places that you'll fit. And then, kind of go forward from there. You'll find out what the financials will look like after you've been through the application process. At Lawrence, we kind of do 3 different main ways of getting aid to students. One is our merit aid scholarships. And at Lawrence, you don't have a separate application for merit aid. Some schools do. So that's a good thing to check on and make sure you know if you need to do any extra materials to be considered for scholarship. And at Lawrence, we do what we call holistic consideration for scholarship, which both means that we're looking at you as a whole applicant. We're looking at your music scores, we're looking at your academics, your fit for the school, recommendations, all of those things. And then the bulk of the scholarship is going to be given in one amount that you have there. Some schools will break it down, especially between academics and music. You might get like one number for music and one number for academics. At Lawrence, we kind of do just one big number for all of it combined. And we don't have minimum GPA requirements that you have to maintain when you're at school here. So that's another good thing to check, if there's minimum GPA requirements that you kind of have to meet during your time at this institution to keep that scholarship. And then at Lawrence, on top of that, we also have grants and loans available. Grants, that's like merit aid in that you don't have to pay it back. It's just based off of need rather than merit. And they're more flexible. So if you have changes in life circumstances, those are often the grants is what can adjust in that. And then there's loans as well, with those federal subsidized and unsubsidized loans. And those start out at $5,500 in your first year and go to $7,500 by your last year. And a good statistic or thing to ask your schools, if you get into the nitty gritty about loans and you're kind of in between some programs, you could ask them, you know, like how students, once they are graduates, how they're doing on paying back those loans. Like, is the school's default rate really low or is it higher? That'll give you a sense of how successful graduates are once they've left and maybe are paying back any loans they take out. So that's something we tell students. Lawrence has a super low default rate because students are getting good jobs after they graduate. But that's kind of the basics of how things work here. And yeah, I'll go ahead and pass it off to the next person.
And Steve, at Stanford, there is no merit-based aid. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So at Stanford, all financial aid is need-based. There is no merit aid. And the other thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that is all admissions decisions are need blind. So when the admissions office looks at a application, they have no idea what the financial need is. So admissions decisions are made need blind. After a student is admitted, then financial aid office will take over. About 70% of Stanford students are on financial aid. And kind of the easy thing to remember is that for families, students whose family income is $65,000 a year or less, everything's free. Tuition's free, room and board is free, everything's free. For students whose family income is $150,000 a year or less, tuition is free, and room and board is on a sliding scale depending on what the family income is. So that's kind of the big picture calculation. A lot of schools' admissions websites will have a cost calculator right on their website. So you can go in there and enter all your family's info and get a pretty good idea of what the actual cost is going to be. I think Trevor's point about list price is a really good one. Don't let that be a gating factor for you. Really dig into things a little deeper than that.
Thanks, Steve. Wonderful. And Brenda, at IU, how does financial aid and merit-based aid work?
They have both merit-based and need-based aid. I think one thing that I would add to what everyone said already is that I wouldn't be afraid to, if you really feel strongly about a specific school, to go back to the teacher or to the admissions office and tell them what you're, let's say you're weighing 2 or 3 different schools, and if you wanted to come to IU and you wanted to be my student, you should come to me, and I will go to bat for you with the admissions office if I believe that you're a good candidate and I really want to work with you. And I do this quite often with students that I'm recruiting, where I'll go to admissions and say, I really, really feel strongly that this person should be here, and can we raise the aid because we're competing with, another institution that's offering more. So I think don't be afraid to ask. The worst answer is sorry, we can't do that. And it's going to be an interesting dilemma as we face the future with COVID, and it's lots of things up in the air right now about the future of music and music schools and higher education just in general. So don't be afraid to ask.
Fantastic, thank you. And then final question for the panel, and then we'll do a couple student submitted questions. What if you go to music school and decide you don't want to do performance any longer? And Emma, would you like to take that one first?
Yes, there's so many options within music that are not just strictly doing performance. And second, there's so many skills you get as a musician that are like indispensable in other industries as well. So, within music, music education, like don't forget about that as an option, or even having your own private studio, doing more of a pedagogy approach. Those are great options. And being a musician today, and I feel like Trevor, as a musician, you can maybe attest to this, it's a very multidisciplinary, like you're doing some teaching, you're doing performing and a bunch of different styles and gigs, maybe doing some solo work, maybe doing some ensemble work, some pit work. You want to have a really wide variety of skill sets. And you might need to do some things that are more on the administrative side, which that's what a number of us on this call do. Is technically you'd call it music administration or arts administration. You could work with nonprofits, you could work with youth orchestra programs, you could work for colleges like I do. And it's a really cool way to keep doing music. And I still play, and, music making is still an important part of what I do. You can do something like music therapy as well, which is maybe a more, health focused application of music, or go into the more production side of things with recording and that sort of thing. And then speaking more broadly to the skill sets you learn in music, it's, I always tell people, like, if you want to talk about working with a team, put together a chamber group and work with them for a year and try to put on a recital and like get over the personality differences and the differences in how you think about the music. And you will be set to go for any team in any industry that you want to work in. I think that musicians have amazing communication skills. You know how to think creatively and outside of the box. You know how to think detailed and then bring it to a big picture, because that's kind of what practicing is all about. And you learn how to work with others in a really productive way. These are skill sets that are super important in the world today. With everything being so much more fast paced and needing to do multiple tasks and wear multiple hats at the same time, the skills you learn as a musician kind of just set you up for that. At Lawrence, we have a lot of multi-interested students, and we have students going to be lawyers or to be doctors or to be in the business field. And like, I have a really good friend in med school right now, and she did flute and biochemistry at Lawrence. And she always talks about how those were so much better than her peers at her med school. And she thinks that's because of music and because of, having that experience and really delving into music. So other careers outside performance, pretty much anything, if you really want to go towards it.
What a beautiful answer, Emma. Thank you. Brenda, did you want to comment on that as well?
Life is not a straight line. So I think it's really, really important. And I have to tell myself that too, because I'm still not sure what I really want to do when I grow up. I just entered this administrative position in July this year. I've done so many different things in my life, as a musician, as a teacher. I think it's too, when you're 17, 18 and you're entering, I see a lot of students who are really scared that and I think especially in our culture today, they start very, very early with a career. You have to choose what you're going to do when you grow up. And I think there's no reason. I mean, do what you love. Do what you love and you're passionate about, and something good will come to that. Take every opportunity that you get to develop as a person, as a musician, as a human, and your life will be full and rich. And you may be playing music as a career, you may not be. You may do something else to make a living, but you have that experience of playing music together and working and developing those skills that Emma so positively talked about. So just keep that in mind. I think I have many students that have come to me and said, I'm going to do this, and then 4 years later they do something else, and I think that's okay. It's good.
Yeah, great. Well said. We're wrapping up on time. We've got just 8 minutes left. And Trevor, would you speak a little bit about what opportunities exist for students to play their instrument in an orchestra if they're not a music major?
Yes. So this is actually one of the components of a musical profile that I think is so exciting, even if you're not looking to be a performer, a professional performer. Being a musician, as Emma and Brenda just so eloquently stated, it makes you actually just an overall such an attractive candidate to a school. even if you're not majoring in music. I grew up, my dad taught at a liberal arts college for 30 years, and he has so many students who minored in music or just participated in ensembles who are, doing all sorts of amazing things in the world right now. And I'm not going to be any more eloquent than Emma or Brenda was, but on a practical level, that can get you a ton of money. And there are schools out there that offer a significant amount of merit award for simply continuing to play in college. And there's stipulations that come with it. You have to perform in ensembles. You'll likely, you'll be taking lessons. But I'll tell you about this hilarious scholarship I came across a couple weeks ago. I got this prompt for a workshop I was giving about playing tuba and marching band. I found a tuba scholarship at a school, $25,000 a year for a scholarship. Here's the requirement. All you have to do is play in marching band. That's it. No major, no minor, marching band participation, and you have $100K for your scholarship throughout your time at the school. And it was given, by an entrepreneur who ended up, making millions and millions of dollars, who just loved his experience at the school marching band. So if you are looking to continue to play your instrument in school, you absolutely should do it. It will make your entire profile so much more rich. It will tell the school so many things about you: discipline, commitment, the ability to synthesize a massive amount of information, everything Emma and Brenda said. This makes you a very attractive candidate to a school. Now, there are some schools, like if you're going to an extremely high-powered music program, the idea that you would go in there and snag an enormous performance scholarship if you're not majoring in music that would not be the best fit for you. But there are plenty of schools that would love to have you. So I encourage you to continue to play in college.
Great. Yeah, we at CYSO, we've placed a couple kids recently at Emory University with a full ride for continuing on in music, but not majoring in music, which is pretty phenomenal. We have a pre-med student whose full tuition's paid for because she plays bassoon. So yeah, make sure you keep that as part of how you introduce yourself to the school. Well, we just have 5 minutes left, but I guess I think we've covered the questions in the comments, which were about fit and weighing test scores against other admissions criteria. I think we talked kind of a lot about that. So hopefully everybody feels like their questions were answered. Any final thoughts from our panelists for the students who are watching? I'm sure you all have final thoughts. Steve, would you like to close with your final thoughts?
Just for all the students, good luck. And you're embarking on a really exciting time of your life. And in a lot of ways, I wish I were in your shoes, in that your college years, you'll expand your experiences and your outlook and your perspective on life. It really is how to make friends in a different way, in a different environment, even in COVID, and even more so post-COVID. But it is a really exciting time. So good luck to all of you.
Thanks, Steve. Emma, final thoughts?
Don't stress too much. Kind of what Brenda was saying about life is not a straight path. If you don't get into the perfect school that, you really want to get into that program, or, you're really worried about making a certain prestige or something, take a deep breath and know that you will find places to be successful. You'll find the place that's kind of meant to be for you. And that journey is going to be twisty, and you'll have some wrong turns, and then also some unexpected turns that end up being amazing and just what you want. There's a good chance that you don't even, the field you end up wanting to go into, you don't even know it exists yet, something you're going to discover in college. So, just take some deep breaths and embrace that. This isn't a time, again, that you need to be perfect and need to get into every single school in a certain way. This is an exciting time, and you guys are all amazing musicians, and we'll all be amazing musicians, throughout this whole process. So, embrace that and take joy in your senior years and the experiences you have, and your last year of high school too.
Thank you. Brenda, final thoughts?
I think it's an exciting time. It's a stressful time, as my colleagues have just said. But I think just it's not even really about the school. And I'm thinking about my own journey and when I was your age, and I desperately wanted to go to a particular school, and I did the 3 auditions, and I was accepted. But then my parents did not financially plan in the way that so I was able to go to any of the schools that I was accepted to. So I ended up staying home, which was at Wichita State University in Kansas, and it was a wonderful experience in many ways, really life changing. And I was all bent out of shape about it, at the beginning, but I worked my tail off, and I'm at IU. And it's sort of like a dream come true. And I think, it's not really about where you go to school. It's about what you do when you get to that school. So if you keep that perspective and you say, okay, I love to do X, and I'm going to put myself out there at the highest possible level, and I'm going to learn from everyone around me, and I'm going to have as many experiences as I possibly can, then you're going to have a really wonderful and rich life. And I think that's the thing that I would encourage you all to keep in your perspective as you go through this process, that you'll win some and you'll lose some, and that's okay. And it's just part of life. And there are a lot of really exciting things out there, and the world is changing incredibly. From year to year. So good luck, and reach out if you have any questions. I'm happy to help you.
Beautiful. Thanks, Brenda. Trevor, final thoughts?
Sure. Echoing everything everyone has already said. No one on a gig asks what school you attended. I can tell you that. Stay open to experiences and always lead with love and enthusiasm that you have already put into all of your art, and you will attract the type of people that you want to attract. And just like everyone has already said, your life will be full. I know mine is, even in a time like right now. And if you want to talk about any of this, feel free to book a call with me. No cost and no commitment. I love chatting with students who are at this point in their development. It's such an exciting time. I remember it like it was yesterday, and I think I also probably forget half of it too. But I would love to chat with you. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you. Well, I'm feeling so inspired. I wish I could go back to college. We want to say one big thank you to our 4 panelists, and then reassure all our students who are watching that if you have follow-up or really specific questions for those institutions, or you'd like to meet with them, we can connect you with them. There's some forums in the chat for connecting with universities, and also our CYSO team can connect you. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to our panelists, and have a good evening.